The cracked photo frame trembled in Mason's hands. Margaret stood frozen in the doorway. For one long, unbearable second, neither of them moved. The soft glow from the lighthouse lamp fell across the broken glass, splitting Daniel's smiling face right down the middle. Mason's throat tightened. I didn't mean to." His voice came out smaller than he wanted. Margaret didn't answer. She stepped into the room slowly, her eyes locked on the frame. Mason's heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. This was it. This was the moment. The yelling, the disappointment, the phone call, the quiet voice that always came before the end. This isn't working. His fingers loosened, and the frame nearly slipped again, but Margaret reached out and steadied it before it fell. Her hand brushed his, cold, shaking. She carefully took the photo from him. For the first time since he had arrived, Mason saw something in her face that terrified him more than anger ever could. Pain, real pain. Not the kind adults used when they wanted him to feel guilty. Not fake frustration, not irritation. This was old pain. Deep pain, the kind that had been living in her for years and had just been touched in the worst possible way. Margaret stared at the cracked glass. Then, without a word, she turned and walked out of the room. Mason didn't move, didn't breathe. He stood there alone, the silence around him suddenly louder than shouting ever could have been. A minute passed, then another. He heard no phone call, no slammed door, no angry footsteps. Just the faint creak of the old house, and then the soft click of a drawer opening somewhere down the hall. Mason slowly stepped into the hallway. He followed the dim light to the kitchen. Margaret stood at the table beneath the hanging copper pans, holding the broken frame in one hand and a folded cloth in the other. She was wiping the glass carefully, too carefully, as if slowing down the moment might make it hurt less. Mason hovered in the doorway. "I said I didn't mean to." Margaret kept her eyes on the frame. "I heard you." "That's it?" Her hand paused. Then she set the photo on the table and looked up at him. Her blue eyes were wet, not overflowing, not dramatic, just full. And that somehow made it worse. "No," she said quietly, "that is not it." Mason swallowed. "Then what?" Margaret took a long breath. "That photograph was taken 2 weeks before Daniel left for Afghanistan." Her voice was steady, but only barely. "It was the last time the three of us stood in one place together. Thomas, Daniel, me." She ran her thumb gently along the cracked edge of the frame. "When the officers came to my door, when they told me my son was gone, I thought that picture would be all I had left that still looked like a normal life." Mason's chest tightened. He looked down. "I didn't know." "No," she said, "you didn't." Silence stretched between them. Then her expression changed, not harder, but sadder. "But that doesn't change what happened." Mason's jaw clenched. The old anger came rushing up like it always did whenever he felt cornered. "Fine," he snapped, "then call Emily." Margaret blinked. "What?" "Call her, tell her I messed it up, tell her to come get me." "Mason, that's what everyone does." His voice cracked so sharply it startled even him. He took a step back. "Sooner or later I break something and then everybody acts like they were trying so hard, but really they're just relieved." Margaret stared at him. "I am not relieved. You should be." He was shouting now, his face red, tears burning behind his eyes. "I break stuff, I hit people, I ruin everything. That's what I do." The words exploded out of him like they'd been waiting for years. Margaret said nothing. So Mason kept going. "Because if I do it first, if I ruin it first, then it doesn't hurt when people leave." The kitchen fell silent. The old clock on the wall ticked. Mason was breathing hard, fists clenched so tight his nails dug into his palms. Margaret looked at him for a long time. Then she pulled out a chair. "Sit." He stared at her. "No. Sit." Her voice wasn't loud, but it held something unshakable. Mason wanted to refuse, wanted to storm off, wanted to smash another mug and prove her wrong. Instead, he sat. Margaret lowered herself into the chair across from him. The cracked photo lay between them on the table, like a wound. "I am angry," she said. Mason looked up. He hadn't expected that. "You should be," he muttered. "I am also hurt." He said nothing. Margaret folded her hands. "But I am not sending you away tonight." Mason's head snapped up. "What?" "You heard me." "Why?" The question came out almost desperate. Margaret's eyes softened. "Because broken things are still worth fixing." He stared at her, then laughed once, short, bitter, unbelieving. "That's stupid." "Yes, most important things are." For a second, Mason's mouth twitched by himself. Then it disappeared. Margaret stood and went to a drawer by the stove. She pulled out a small old tin box. When she returned to the table, she opened it. Inside were photographs, letters, a military dog tag, and a child's drawing folded in half. She placed them gently on the table. "These," she said, "are what I kept when Daniel died." Mason stared. There was a picture of Daniel as a little boy holding a fish nearly as long as his arm, another of him in a high school hockey uniform, one of him in military fatigues smiling under a desert sun, and a small drawing in crayon, a crooked house, a stick figure family, a yellow sun in the corner. Mason frowned. "What's that?" Margaret looked at it. "Daniel drew it when he was 6. She gave the faintest smile. "He spelled family wrong." Mason looked closer. Sure enough, the bottom of the page said in shaky letters, "Famille." Something warm and painful moved in his chest. Margaret looked at him carefully. "You know what grief does, Mason." He shrugged. "It hurts." "Yes," she said, "but that's not the worst part." She touched the dog tag lightly. "The worst part is how it changes the way you expect people to leave." Mason's breathing slowed. "You start to believe everyone is temporary." He stared at the table. "Because that is exactly it." Margaret leaned forward slightly. "So you push first, break first, leave first. You tell yourself it's control." Her voice dropped. "But it's just fear wearing armor." Mason's eyes stung. He hated that she could see him, hated it, and hated it even more that she was right. That night neither of them said much more. Margaret repaired the frame as best as she could, removing the shattered glass and placing the photo carefully between 2 pieces of cardboard until she could buy a new one. Mason watched from the hallway. When she finished, she carried it back to his room. She set it on the dresser again, still cracked, still damaged, still there. Then she turned to him. "You don't get to destroy what matters to me," she said softly. Mason nodded once. "You understand?" He swallowed. "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment, then added, "And I don't get to throw you away because you're difficult." He stared at her. No one had ever said anything like that before. No one. "Good night, Mason." She left the room, and for the first time in years, the boy who no one wanted cried where no one could see him. He buried his face in the pillow and shook with silent, ugly sobs he didn't know how to stop. For his mother, for the homes, for the broken frame, for the part of him that had wanted Margaret to yell, because yelling would have been easier than being understood. The next morning the house was quiet, too quiet. Mason woke late and pulled on his hoodie, already bracing for the cold distance he assumed would be waiting. But when he stepped into the kitchen, he found a plate of toast, a bowl of oatmeal, and a note propped against the sugar jar. "At the hardware store buying a new frame. Feed the cat. Don't burn down my house. M." Mason read it twice. Then a third time. She'd gone out. She'd left him alone. She trusted him enough to leave him alone. His stomach twisted with a feeling he didn't recognize. It almost felt worse than punishment. The orange cat, whose name he'd learned was Pickles, rubbed against his leg and meowed. Mason crouched automatically and scratched behind the cat's ears. "You got a weird name," he muttered. Pickles purred like a tiny engine. Mason fed him, then he ate the oatmeal, then he stood in the middle of the kitchen staring at the sink full of dishes. No one had told him to wash them. No chore chart, no lecture, no test. He glanced toward the front window, still no sign of Margaret's truck. His eyes drifted to the counter. The dish soap sat beside the facet, a clean towel hung from the oven handle. Mason frowned at them like they were insulting him. Then, muttering under his breath, he rolled up his sleeves. By the time Margaret returned, the dishes were done. The table had been wiped, and Pickles was asleep in a patch of sunlight near the radiator.
Margaret stepped through the door carrying a small paper bag and stopped. Her gaze moved slowly over the kitchen, then to Mason, who immediately crossed his arms. I was bored. How tragic. She scowled. She set the paper bag on the table. Inside was a simple black photo frame. Not expensive, not fancy, but new. She took out the repaired photo and slid it inside. The crack in the picture was still there, running diagonally across Daniel's smile. But now it was protected again. Margaret placed it on the table between them. Mason stared at it, then whispered, "I'm sorry." The words felt heavy, rough, like they'd been dragged out of somewhere deep. Margaret looked at him. "I know. You should be mad. I am." He blinked. "But I'm also proud of you." He frowned. "For what?" "You apologized." He looked away. "It doesn't fix it." "No," she said, "but it's how fixing starts."